trying to get somewhere as well. The truth of the matter is, I thought I was speaking to 7, and I promised my wife, whose cousin is from California, who has never been to our home, that I would try to be back before they went to sleep tonight. So we're going to do our best to make it. But thank you so much, Art, for having me. It's great to be with you. Frankly, if it weren't for the Tea Party movement in Illinois, I would not have won the last Republican primary for governor, nor would I have won 98 counties in the state in the general election and received nearly 1.8 million votes. So give yourselves a round of applause for that. David and Heidi and others need your help in this next election if we're going to make sure we get the results we want to get. And that is the results that will put the right people in office, that will fix our state. A state that's broken and that needs something to help it. And that's why I'm here today. Our state's broke. You know, we've lost over the last 5 years 290,000 jobs. We've become one of the largest out-migration states in the nation. And as I've often said, if higher taxes and higher fees and more litigation and more regulation created jobs, we wouldn't lose them. We'd be the #1 job-producing state in the nation. But we know they do cost jobs. The Pat Quinn Democratic 67% tax increase has cost our state dearly. We need a governor who will promise not to extend that tax increase. It starts there. We need someone who believes in less government, lower taxes, and I'm proud to tell you that as your governor, I will veto any attempt by Democrats or Republicans to extend that tax increase beyond its sunset. And as far as I know, I'm the only candidate for governor, Republican or Democrat, who has said unequivocally he will not negotiate with Mike Madigan and not negotiate with John Culleton to extend that tax increase, because that's where it starts. It starts by giving the money back to the people who rightly deserve it, the taxpayers, to giving it to families, to giving it to businesses so they can reinvest in Illinois. The second step is having a governor who understands we have to balance our budget and live within our means. You know, the Democrats seem to think that we need to supersize government. I believe we need a value meal. We need to restrict the size and scope of government, living within our means, fostering the discipline that we need. It not only starts with government spending, but it starts with pension reform. We have over $100 billion in the best case scenario in unfunded pension liabilities. Now frankly, it's hard to blame the people who are entitled to those pensions because they've paid every dime they were supposed to pay into those systems. But it's Governor Quinn, Governor Blagojevich, members of the General Assembly, unfortunately both Republican and Democrat, who voted for budgets that ignored the responsibility that they had to meet the state's obligation that created much of the problem. It's Republicans and Democrats who voted for the Blagojevich borrowing scheme that put our state so much in debt. We need a governor who will demand that the legislature pass balanced budgets, that will demand that the legislature pass pension reform so that we can live up to what people are owed but stop the bleeding in the future. And that's what I will do as governor of this state. It goes though beyond just balancing our budget, pension reform, and holding the line on taxes. It continues on to improving our schools. Ladies and gentlemen, our schools are broken. I stand for vouchers. I stand for competition. Not because I want to destroy the public school system, but because I believe, like in my business, competition will increase the value proposition of all education, giving parents a choice and empowering them in our children's educational lives works. It works everywhere it's been used, and we need a governor who knows that vouchers and parental choice in education will not only benefit their child, but will also work to bring the competitive forces to public education and give us a better public educational system. Another thing we need is voter integrity. Congratulations to you. I've sponsored a bill that the Democrats chastised me for. A bill that would have required, not that we just verify signatures, but that you actually have an identification. That you prove that you're entitled to vote. You see, because your vote loses its value when people cheat the system. And we need to protect that value, and we need to make sure we get that job done. And lastly, we need a governor who will put term limits on the ballot so we can end ourselves with the fiefdoms of the Mike Madigans and the Chicago Democrats that have destroyed this state over the last several decades. I've sponsored that initiative and I'll continue to fight for it. It's not just about rank and file legislators, it's truly about getting rid of these political fiefdoms. And anyone who tells you that term limits on leaders will do that is wrong. There's no reason we can't put a 10-year term limit on members serving in the Illinois House or the Illinois Senate and give our government back to its people through a citizen legislature that works in so many other states. That's how we're going to fix Illinois. And then when we fix it in business, we call that merchandising. We need a governor who will go out and recruit private sector business investment into our state. Someone who understands that Illinois is the center of this nation's economy, if not the world's economy. Someone who understands that we have valuable infrastructure from rail, river, and road, air, and other sources. Someone who understands that we've got manufacturing facilities, colleges, universities, got great diversity, huge financial markets, all here in what could be the greatest state in the nation. Someone who can leverage what we have and bring back more than the 290,000 jobs we've lost. Because that's how we build a better future for our families and their families. You know, unfortunately, last week I was talking to someone about running for election, and she turned to me and said, I had a heartfelt discussion with my children. They laughed at me about running for office in Illinois. I said, Mom, you ought to be thinking about where you're going to live your retirement years rather than running for office in Illinois. We can't give up. We have to fight for our state. We owe it to be good stewards, and I know that's why you're here tonight and what you will do to get that job done. I will say that some people have said, why would you bother running for office in Illinois, particularly after the last presidential election? And I have to admit, we took it in the chin. You know, I'm reminded of a joke I heard over the last summer about Barack Obama playing golf behind a lady who tripped and fell. To which, before the election, he rushed up to her and said, ma'am, can I help you up? She said, no, I'm fine. He said, no, I'd like to help you up and introduce myself. She said, I know who you are. He says, well, then can I have your vote? To which she laughed and said, listen, Sonny, I fell on my rear, not my head. But you got to look at the last election cycle in Illinois and wonder if we didn't, the voters didn't fall on their head. You know, we lost seats, congressional seats. We lost seats in the Illinois House and the Illinois Senate. In fact, we're in a super minority. We can do better. We did do better. When I was privileged to lead the Republican ticket in the office for governor, we picked up 3 congressional seats. We picked up 2 state Senate seats. We picked up 6 seats in the Illinois House. In fact, when the Democrats went to gerrymander the next map, they couldn't do it in such a way that I didn't beat Pat Quinn in a majority of the Illinois Senate seats. Ladies and gentlemen, with the right vision, with the right leadership and the right belief, we can take back this state. We can not only win the governor's office, but we can win seats in the Illinois House and Illinois Senate and congressional seats. I predict, if I'm at the top of the ticket, we'll win no fewer than 3 congressional seats. I predict we'll win at least 2 Senate seats and maybe up to a dozen House seats. But what we learned is if we don't have candidates who have the vision and the belief in personal liberty and freedom, who can't translate that, who haven't built the base, we can't win. With your help, we received nearly 1.8 million votes in the last election. We won the primary. I believe that's something we can build on. That's why Nancy and I are committed to doing this for all of us. Not just for you, but for your children and your grandchildren. This state can be great once again. But it's going to take each of our individual efforts. So tonight, I ask you to do a couple things. 1, make an informed choice. Find out where the other candidates stand on the issues, or where they fail to take a stand. That's just as important. Then go out and work to making sure your friends, your neighbors, and your relatives are as informed as you are about what those candidates stand for. And then lastly, make sure they vote. And set an example. And I'll tell you this, I've learned the hard way. I've been a traditional voter all my life. I've been proud of the fact that I was up earlier than anybody else. I was the first person to my poll and voted, not just to avoid the crowds, but because I wanted to exercise my right. But I'm tired of going into election day being down because other people have voted early and we have not. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to take advantage of early voting like the others do and make sure our voters get there early and set the example. We cannot wait for election day to vote. Election day is when we need to refocus our energy to making sure the right people go to the polls who haven't gone yet. So, please get informed about the voters. Share what they stand for or fail to stand for with the people you have influence with, and then go vote early and make sure they do it as well, because that's the recipe to success. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. I am, as much as Art likes to talk about normal, I actually live in Bloomington, but it's as close to normal as you can get, Art. You're right. I do look forward to going back there tonight, but I also want to take time to answer some of your questions, things that are important to you. So with that, Art, if I may take a couple questions.
Now, what we're going to do, grab the microphone that's on the wire behind you. And then we can let the person who's asking the question use this microphone. And I think that microphone still works, right?
I think so. I know so.
Thank you for being here, by the way, and I like everything you say. I have to ask a tough question. Where and why do you stand on the issue of gay marriage? I've heard so many conflicting reports that I'm totally confused.
Well, I've always been consistent in my position. I believe that marriage is a traditional commitment between only a man and a woman. The inconsistencies or the confusion, frankly, lie in the fact that this Illinois Republican Party chairman, who shares my last name, former, is a supporter of gay marriage. He thinks that our party has to move to the middle to win. Let me tell you something. You don't have to look far or at too many elections to realize that if you're going to win as a Republican in Illinois, you've got to bring your party together. And I believe the Republican Party platform has value. And I stand with that platform. I believe you need to stand on your principles to win elections as a Republican in Illinois, and I'll continue to do so. But that's where you find the inconsistency.
Yes, thank you very much.
Now, I'm going to ask the next question, which is the cousin of that question, and that is, where do you stand on abortion?
Well, I believe that we have a fundamental obligation to protect innocent human life. My beliefs have been consistent on that, and they'll continue to be consistent.
Okay. And here's our next question.
Thanks for coming out, Bill. Governor Quinn recently did something I actually agreed with. He's withholding paychecks from legislators who aren't, coming to some kind of conclusion on the pension reform. As governor, would you do something like that or something more? And how are we going to get this logjam broken and get the pension reform done?
As governor, I wouldn't have had to do that. Let me just say, this is a populist demagogue we have as governor who spent all his time in the last 2 weeks of session trying to pass a gay marriage bill without 1 ounce of effort on meaningful pension reform.
Wasted time.
Pardon?
He was wasting time.
He's not a leader. We need a leader in the governor's office. The legislature is starving to solve this crisis. The people who are dependent in their retirement years are hoping for a solution to this crisis. There is a win-win, but it's not going to happen without a leader in the governor's office. I've invited the governor twice to show up to our committee meetings, and he's failed to show up once. I will say that the unfortunate thing about this, and I truly believe this, is that when the governor vetoed the pay for legislators, he created the biggest divide we've ever seen in the Democratic Party. And frankly, they've dug their heels in my opinion. And they are refusing to move forward on pension reform until they win the lawsuit, because they don't want this governor to have a win. Now, long term, that may be a good win for us, because it may divide the Democratic Party in the governor's race, although they have a way of coming together. But it hasn't helped. But I will tell you that as governor, I believe I could pass meaningful pension reform, and I wouldn't need to go to that extent or that level to get that job done.
Next question.
I'm going to ask a question that's kind of a hot button for me that I've done a lot of work on, and that's job creation. I recently saw a YouTube video on Senator Ted Cruz talking about the fact that our youth unemployment is about 25%, our black unemployment is about 16%, and Hispanic is 9%. So our young people in the country can't get jobs. We have a jobs problem. When, during the Clinton administration, when jobs were plentiful, we could pay all our bills, including all of our social programs. We seem to have lost the fact that we don't understand that if you don't have jobs, you can't go and pay for those things. One thing that particularly bothers me is when I started work in 1975, there were about 30 private sector employees for each government employee. Do you know how many there are today? Just give me an answer. I asked Tammy Duckworth the same question.
30?
There was 30 when I started working. Private sector versus government sector.
In the nation?
In the nation.
I don't know that number in the nation.
Okay. Right now, if you look at the National Debt website, National Debt Clock website, there's 110 million taxpayers in the U.S. and there are 26 million government employees. That makes out a ratio of 4 private sector employees to each government employee. Take the City of Chicago public school system. The teachers average $76,000 a year in salary. Okay, they get pension and health care benefits that exceed what you can do in the private sector. The private sector employee in the City of Chicago makes $43,000 a year. So you're talking about 4 people making $43,000 a year to pay for one person that makes $76,000 plus better benefits. We've got a jobs problem, and everybody seems to ignore the problem all the way from our president on down to our local officials. You can talk about fixing other things, but if we don't fix the problem of people working, jobs and income solve problems. And I haven't heard enough people talking about it and making those numbers aware to people to make them realize. I asked kids out of school, I said, if all 5 out of 5 people are government employees, who pays their salaries? They don't get the question. And that concerns me, because if you can't pay your bills, you can't have all these social programs. And so I want to know more specifically, how can you fix the jobs problem to make things better?
And I hope you realize the first thing I opened with is the fact that we've got a jobs problem. 290,000 net loss of jobs in the last 5 years. By my estimation, that's a bottom line effect of $4.5 billion per year on the state budget. Why is it so big? Well, there's 2 problems with it. When people are out of work, they receive government support. And when they're out of work, they are paying taxes. So the number escalates. So it's a double-edged sword, or a double win if you focus on it. What we need to do, frankly, when I talk to businesses about reinvesting, and I'm in Illinois, one of the first things that comes out of their mouth is Obamacare. They are scared to death of what Obamacare is doing, which is why I've not supported the implementation of Obamacare in Illinois. And I'm hopeful that the United States Congress takes the funding away so that we can remove this negative effect on creating it. The second thing we have to do, the complaint I hear, is that our state is broke. So if you can invest in a state like Indiana that has balanced budgets, less pension crisis, why wouldn't you, as opposed to Illinois? So we have to go back to balancing our budget, prioritizing our spending, solving our pension crisis, and all these things that will improve the climate, which in business, as I said, I'm in the business world. It's called merchandising. You have to merchandise your product. I also open by saying regulation and litigation. Tort reform and workers' compensation reform are right at the top of the list. And it's not that our injured workers shouldn't be protected and taken care of. It's just that when it comes to taking care of them, if they have an injury at the workplace, it should be taken by workers' compensation. When they have an injury that's not at the workplace, it should be health insurance. For several reasons. One is workers' comp insurance costs a lot more to care for because of the nature of the payment cycle or system. So we need workers' compensation reform. We need medical malpractice reform, regulation and litigation. Regulation in this state, the bureaucracies that are dealing with everything from how quick we can get a concealed carry card, dragging out as long as they can through regulation, to permitting wells for oil and natural gas in southern Illinois that create jobs, are a part of the problem. So we've got to have someone who understands business, who's met a payroll, and apply those solutions to government so that more people will invest in Illinois and create those jobs.
Now, there's 2 points that you didn't cover as well that bother me. The government doesn't distinguish when they say job creation about the difference between creation of a government job and a private sector job. Every time I've seen the numbers, they don't distinguish when they report the numbers. Why is that?
Well, you can drill down to it because you can't see it. For instance, we know that most of the jobs created under the Obama administration were census jobs. You know, so we do have some of the statistics you can drill down to. But your point is absolutely right. It's private sector jobs that build a sustainable economy, not government sector jobs.
Next question?
How you doing? Thank you for coming.
Thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you, thank you. My big thing right now is higher education and MAP grants. The way I see it with MAP grants is, you know, Illinois is making an investment in students, but the problem here with the MAP grant is a lot of students who get the MAP grant end up not completing college. So they're pretty much getting free taxpayers' money, and Illinois is not seeing a return on their investment. Now, for me, for example, I have GI benefits that help me get through school. But if I drop a class or something like that, I have to pay that money back. And I was wondering how we can fix this problem in Illinois, because I know that we have to make an investment in students, but how can we make sure that our investment comes for a good return for Illinois?
Well, I think your point is very well taken, and I think we need to look at, I talked earlier about vouchers, tuition waivers for parents when it comes to K through 12. I think we need to look at the similar situation, grants for higher education. But I think those grants need to be forgiven based on graduation and based on working in Illinois. Otherwise, we should look at having them paid back. That will help retain people in Illinois and hold them accountable for the money we're giving them. So I think you're right on track.
And let me just give a suggestion with that. One suggestion I've heard is that you either use 3.0 or 4.0 GPA as a baseline, and then you say, okay, to the student, we'll look at your GPA from last semester. If you use the 4.0 baseline, whatever your GPA is, we'll divide that by 4. So if you get a B average, you get 3/4 of what a full financial aid is, because you only got a B average. You got to get straight A's to get 100%. Now some people said maybe make it a B average to be 100%, but so that the guy who goes to school, gets a full grant, but doesn't go to class, he's just there playing computer games all day, and his GPA is 0.4, doesn't get more money next semester.
Obviously there's things to look at to make it, but I think you got to start incrementally. And I think if you do say you got to pass classes for that grant to eventually be forgiven, and if you do, I think if you're going to take the degree we've paid for and use it in another state, I don't think that works. I think that degree should be used to earn an income and pay taxes in our state, and then we're willing to forgive it. So.
And that's how it was when I got a teacher's scholarship. I know there are a lot of people who got teacher's scholarships when I was in school in the 70s. And one of the rules was that depending on where you taught, you had to teach less. For example, if you went to the inner city of Chicago, where you'd actually get, be qualified for combat hostile fire pay because of the number of shootings, you'd maybe get all your debt forgiven faster than if you were teaching in Lake Forest, where they don't have that many shootings. Next question.
Senator Brady, What are your thoughts on right to work? Would you implement it if you're elected to be governor?
Yeah, it's a great issue, and it's something that I continue to study. The truth of the matter is, under the current makeup of the General Assembly, it's probably not going to pass. So it probably won't be on my desk. But I've always been for freeing up workers' rights, and I think you've got to be careful that we don't give unions too much control. I'm not anti-union, by the way. I believe there was a time when unions did a lot of good, and there still may be some good that they do. In fact, I'll give you an example of where I think they did good in Bloomington, Illinois. But to go back to your question, there has to be a fair balance between business and labor. And as we all know, Illinois is not a right-to-work state. I happen to come from Bloomington, Illinois, that has an automobile plant called Mitsubishi. It's a UAW plant. They actually realized within the union that the plant was going to close unless they negotiated to have a wage that the plant could remain open. There's some people that thought that maybe they wanted, some wanted it to close, not the union members. But I'm proud to say that within the union confines, those people negotiated a contract that kept the plant open. And I will tell you this, right-to-work state, non-right-to-work state, union, non-union, it is a contract that delivers them a wage lower than any other automobile manufacturer. So there are times when the union can work. But I will say this, we have to make sure that there's a fair balance for competitive forces between business and labor.
Senator, thank you for coming once again. Why do we separate the illegal alien problem from the welfare problem? And the illegal and the gray market, which is the cash and barter economy. These all need to be solved, in my view, together. What's your point of view?
Well, my point of view is that you need to enforce the laws that are in the books. I do believe that our immigration problem started as far back as the Kennedy administration, and much of the union problem started back then. And the failure to realize that if you restrict and create barriers to entry, the black market will exist, and that's what we've seen happen. And so we have laws in the books that say to employers you'll be penalized if you do break that law. Those laws need to be enforced. I also believe we need, as I said earlier, a stronger border. And then I do think that there are some advantages to opening the doors, particularly to people who obey our laws and provide something to our economy. But enforcing the laws that are in the books are critical to your the problem you outlined in your question.
Senator, we were talking earlier about the importance of having good candidates for the Republican Party. What, if anything, can you and, frankly, your fellow candidates for the Republican nomination do with the Central Committee or whomever to get more and better candidates?
It's a problem that I'm deeply worried about. There's a lot of things I've learned from my last election and that I'll be able to correct as a nominee. One of the other things I learned was that when we were looking at a par with Governor Walker and Governor Kasich in my election, one of the weaknesses that we couldn't overcome was the fact that they had Republican majorities in their legislature, and that adversely affected our turnout compared to theirs. The only way we can overcome that is to recruit good candidates. I think right now the Central Committee's not that engaged in that. As a candidate for governor, I am engaged because I know how important it is. But I think it's something we all need to be engaged in to make sure we have the best and brightest running. But there's only one way we're going to get the best and brightest to run, and that is if we support them. So we not only have to ask them to lay their life on the line, so to speak, but we have to give them the encouragement and support they need to run in those races. David and others who are doing this need our help. And if we're going to continue to do that, we have to do it. I can't speak to the Central Committee, but I can tell you as hopefully a gubernatorial nominee, and I think likely, and then elected, I'll continue to work through that process to encourage and foster good candidates. And as governor of the state, I'll even take it a step further to make sure we have candidates that put us in the majority in both the Illinois House and Senate.
Could I give you a suggestion?
I'm always open to suggestions.
I don't know if it's, my suggestion would be, I don't know if you have the resources to do it, and that would be for you to have a named representative, not elected, I mean a named person in each of the Senate and representative districts, state districts in Illinois, whose sole job would be to seek out, find, and help recruit the best candidate they can possibly find through pre-primaries or caucuses or whatever means are necessary. But I know it would take resources to do this.
And we, as a member of this Republican Senate leadership team, we are doing that in that caucus, but it does take, I think, leadership at the top, candidates for governor, saying, we need you to do this. Because let's face it, it's difficult to elect someone to try to run for office and to be part of a super minority.
I know.
But if you have the belief that the gubernatorial candidate is going to win, then there's a point of difference. And then I think we can build on that. But yes, you're right. We're doing that particularly in the Senate leadership. I'm assuming that the House is going to do the same thing now that they have new leadership in the House. And we're going to build on that.
So the question is, who in this room wants to move into Mike Madigan's district and run against him? And the second question is, who wants to move to Cullerton's district and run against him?
All we need is enough Republicans to say they don't control House and Senate, and there's a problem on the way.
Senator Brady, how do you think we can get the young voters? I think that's so important to the Republican Party.
I think we're getting them. Who was it? You spoke of the high unemployment, or the highest unemployment we've ever seen of the young voters. I think they're getting it. They're realizing that the federal Obama administration policies aren't creating jobs. They're educated. They went to college. They're struggling to find jobs. And I think we're getting them through their pocketbook because they're realizing the failed policies. We're also starting to see it in the Black and Latino communities, where they realize the failed economics of Democrats in Chicago, i.e. Illinois, Obama, i.e. the national level, are not creating the economic opportunity that they need and feel they and deserve. So I think we have to leverage that, and we have to ask. We have to ask and inform. So it comes what I asked you today, a couple things I asked you to do. Learn about the differences between the candidates. Who's not going to raise taxes? Tell other people about it, young people as well. And I think you'll find that they're looking for that value proposition. And right now, I believe we have it to offer.
Senator, with the recent eventual passage, Illinois being the last state to enact a discrete firearms carry law, I don't think I really need that, but not having much choice because the Illinois Appellate Court said to not have one is unconstitutional. With much opposition, mainly on the Democratic Party, what we wound up with, as Cinderella was running to the pumpkin, both sides see it as a compromise of a compromise. As this is being grudgingly implemented by the Democrats, from this point forward, do you personally feel the law as it was enacted needs slightly more restriction because it could be too dangerous as it is, or do you feel it should be less restrictive because we lost too many of the benefits of said law?
I hope you know the answer.
I do. I want to hear it.
I hope you know what my answer is.
Please tell me.
Yeah, this law was far too restrictive. But let me tell you this. Thank God for that judge. Okay, because we know that the facts are every state that enacted some form of concealed carry. And by the way, we're not talking about the Wild West. We're talking about training. We're talking about background checks. Every state that did that, crime goes down. Now, we also knew that there was a Democratic majority and Governor Quinn would veto the bill. So we needed a bill that we knew we could get a supermajority vote. Even the groups that are the most ardent supporters of the Second Amendment agreed to that. The good news is we were involved in some polling data that showed that in Illinois there are a number of folks who are scared to death of concealed carry, come from certain demographics. We had polling data for Iowa. We knew that the same group in Iowa was not afraid of concealed carry. Why? Well, because they had lived with it and had learned its value. So for instance, something that I was ardently opposed to, that I think hits some of the minority communities the worst, and particularly those low income, is when you oppose it on public transportation. My daughter's a nurse at Children's in Chicago. She works on the heart team. She gets called in at 2 or 3 in the morning. Well, she doesn't have a limo to pick her up and drive her home. She doesn't have a car. She probably sometimes can't afford a taxi. She might have to rely on public transportation. But she doesn't have the same right as other people who have other means. I believe that as people become more comfortable, we will see laws that remove some of the restrictions, because people know those laws that remove some of those restrictions will make our streets safer. I would tell you that when I had an opportunity to visit with a group of black ministers, and the Chicago politicals wanted to say, not in Chicago, but everywhere else in the state, they were ardently opposed to that and said, you better not let them deny us our rights, the folks are, because they get it. They need to be able to make their streets safer. Concealed carry laws do that. Again, realizing that proper background checks, proper training, and all the things that are important. But there are several areas of the law that were too restrictive. But I believe we'll be able to amend those to actually eventually have the best concealed carry law in the country.
And isn't the greatest fear the fear of the unknown? For people who do not know that the greatest value of that law is its deterrent value. Because the dirt bags on the streets, i.e. criminals who will not follow any laws pertaining to firearms or any other things, therefore they're criminals, okay? They don't know which good guy is carrying and which one isn't. And throughout the last 20 years, as all these states were getting their laws, they have found that from 1.5 to 2.5 million incidents happen every year. And the perpetrator says, okay, here it is, it's time to get raped or robbed or whatever, and the properly licensed citizen displays the weapon. In 95% of those encounters, a shot is not even fired, but the crime is prevented. Those are the facts.
Absolutely.
The best home invasion I ever heard about was a guy came down the stairs, brand new resident in whatever the community was, and his house was broken into. He comes down the stairs, he's halfway into the living room with his AR-15 in his hand. And the bad guys are in the living room, and he says, you know, lay down on the floor. And the bad guy said, you're not allowed to have a gun like that here. And he says, do I care? And the guy pulled the gun out, and the guy with the AR-15 popped off the first shot. And the other guy pulled the gun out, the AR-15 fired off a second shot. And these guys are like, this isn't the way it's supposed to happen. See, this FBI agent knew what he was doing with his AR-15 when somebody broke into his house. But the last question I have, and I know you want to get back to town, down to normal, and God knows we need politicians to be normal in this state. Chicago Police Superintendent, I don't know his name, McCarthy, was quoted the other day as saying, we're going to have a lot of people shot because I'm going to train our police officers to shoot people. Does that mean that we, with controls, with concealed carry permits, have the right to shoot the cops before they shoot us?
Well, I hope that's not what he was talking about. I will tell you this, crime is a serious issue in Chicago, which is why I sponsored a resolution that I passed in the Illinois Senate that said that the police chief, the state's attorney, need to empower the U.S. attorney and their resources to crack down on gun crimes. We have found that in Richmond, Virginia, I think it's Richmond, where they did this, they saw a 50% reduction in the incidence of gun crimes. Why? Well, A, federal resources assisting. B, federal laws are stronger and put those criminals behind bars for longer. And the other win is they're in federal prison, not state prison. And so it's something to be taken seriously. And it did pass bipartisan support. I sponsored it. It passed the Illinois Senate unanimously, I believe. And now we're starting to see some movement in that direction to crack down on those gun crimes that are mostly led, we all know, by the gangs. And we need to empower our resources to do that. I believe we're going to do that. And we'll get that job done. So thank you very much. You had one last question?
Yeah, I do. Common Core is a hot issue in Illinois right now, and for those of you who don't know, it's the curriculum that we're so concerned about. I'm not sure where you stand on that.
Well, let me just say this. I believe that competition works best.
I know you like the market.
And I also believe that competition at the school board level. You can't have competition at school board level if the state of Illinois is controlling you or the federal government. So what I believe, and I've said this before, I would abolish the National Department of Education. I also said I would abolish the State Department of Education.
Yeah.
So my beliefs are associated with we don't need a big Washington government reaching in. Yes, we need to hold schools accountable, but that needs to be done, I think, mostly at the local level. So Common Core is something that, from what I've been able to garner, is something that reaches too far in terms of federal control, and I move toward local control. Well, let me just close in saying thank you so much for coming out. I know you're...
I'm going to interrupt and ask one more quick question on Common Core. And that is, I asked the same question of Randy Holtgren about Common Core. I asked him, how did he vote on Common Core? So I'm going to ask, how did you vote on Common Core?
There was no vote.
There was no vote, exactly. There was no vote. Why is it here if there was no vote? Exactly.
Now in closing. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Please remember the 3 things I asked you for. Learn about the other candidates. Find out what they're willing to stand for and what they're not willing to talk about. Once you find that out, please share that with your neighbors, your relatives, and your friends. And then lastly, make sure they go to the polls and vote informed. Thank you all, and God bless you.